is Radio Prague International, coming to you from the Czech capital.
Hello and welcome. I'm Anna-Marie Regner and you're listening to Czechia in 30 Minutes, the show where we give you a rundown of what's recently been happening in the country in just half an hour. Coming up in today's program, iconic Barrandov Bridge sculpture collapses after years of neglect. Train or tram? Czechia's first hybrid hits the test track. The train-tram could reshape regional transport. Czech President Pavel urges dialogue and warns against war fatigue. But first, here's the news brought to you by Ian Willoughby.
News.
The Czech government has approved a ban on mobile telephones in schools. Minister of Education Robert Plaga told reporters on Monday that the cabinet had unanimously backed the move, which was proposed by him and Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. If approved by the lower house, the relevant legislation would take effect in September next year. The bill envisages a ban on mobile phone usage by preschool and elementary school pupils and by lower grades in secondary schools. It would also cover not just class and break time, but time spent in school dining facilities and voluntary activities on school premises. From next year, Czechs could see their pensions increase by 500 crowns monthly every 5 years, starting at the age of 80. The government approved a draft amendment to this effect on Monday, the Minister of Labour and Social Affairs, Aleš Juchelka, announced. The move would expand current age-related pension increases. Meanwhile, starting in 2028, pensions should again rise for those who continue working past retirement age. The legislation approved by the government will now go before the lower house. An earlier version of the amendment also included a revised indexation system under which old age pensions would rise by half of the growth in real wages instead of one-third. Mr. Juchelka said the cabinet would return to this proposal in future. The Czech Bar Association has come out against efforts to abolish the statute of limitations for murder in the Czech Republic. Representatives said on Monday that a change like that would have no real effect and would, on the contrary, place a burden on the legal system. The lawyers said that there had been no expert discussion on the issue and that the statute of limitations for murder had only been extended this year from 20 to 30 years. The abolition is being advocated by Justice Minister Jeroným Tejc and a group of senators. Sparta Prague have drawn the French club Lyon in the third qualifying round for the league stage of football's Champions League. If Sparta get past Lyon, they will have to get through one more round of qualifiers to reach Europe's top club competition. If they fail to beat Lyon, they will go straight into the second-tier Europa League. Slavia Prague, who lifted the Czech title last season, go straight into the league phase of the Champions League. Barbara Krejcikova has climbed 6 places in the world rankings to 26th after winning tennis's Athens Open on Sunday. The Czech, who's 30, overcame Athens-born Maria Sakkari 7-6, 6-3 for the 9th WTA singles title of her career, and her first since she lifted the Wimbledon title 2 years ago. The first half of this week in Czechia should see mainly overcast weather with temperatures below 25 degrees Celsius. The coolest day of the week, with maximum temperatures ranging from 17 to 21 degrees Celsius, will be Thursday, when rain is expected. Warmer weather is due to return next weekend. And the actual weather forecast, it should be mainly overcast in Czechia on Tuesday with an average high temperature of 21 degrees Celsius. Similar weather is expected on the following days.
A monumental concrete sculpture that stood beside Prague Barrandov Bridge for more than 3 decades collapsed late last week, sending tons of debris onto a nearby road and cycle path. No one was injured, but the incident has sparked debate over the state of public art in the Czech capital. Daniela Lazarova has more.
The 6-metre-high, 15-metre-wide sculpture Rovnováha, which translates as balance, was the work of sculptor Josef Klimeš, who is regarded as one of the most important Czech sculptors of the second half of the 20th century. Created in 1989, Rovnováha formed part of the artistic concept accompanying the construction of Barrandov Bridge. Sculptor, educator and public art expert Pavel says it was inseparably linked to its surroundings.
Vyzvali k tomu prostě tehdy nejlepšího sochaře na tohle v této disciplíně.
They commissioned the best sculptor in this field, and I think he came up with a perfect size-specific solution. He took the profile of the Vltava riverbed and turned it into a three-dimensional graphic symbol. When you look at the sculpture, you can see that on the Barrandov side it cascades down like the Barrandov cliffs, while on the opposite side it rises gradually from the sandstone bank. It is essentially the profile of the river.
Se pozvolna stoupá a je to vlastně profil toho koryta řeky.
According to Prague City Hall, officials had long been aware that the sculpture was in poor condition. By coincidence, the city council was due to discuss a proposal on Monday to approve its controlled demolition and replacement with an exact replica. For Karos, however, Friday's collapse is not an isolated incident, but part of a much broader problem.
No, od roku 1992 zanikly vlastně všechny instituce.
In 1992, the institutions responsible for commissioning and maintaining public artworks were abolished, and Prague has since lost around 480 works of art in public spaces. This is a shocking number that can only be compared to the Hussite Wars, but back then cities were burning. Today, Prague is gradually losing valuable works of public art simply through neglect. In most cases, this is the result of neglected maintenance, the privatization of public space, changes to public space, or a combination of these factors.
Privatizací toho veřejného prostoru a proměnou toho veřejného prostoru nebo kombinací těchto faktorů.
Karos believes the sculpture's deterioration was accelerated not only by decades of insufficient maintenance, but also by increasingly extreme weather linked to climate change.
To dílo samozřejmě tou zanedbanou údržbou mělo prostě praskliny.
The neglected structure had cracks and water was getting inside. Then you suddenly have 40-degree heat, which was once unimaginable in Prague, followed by torrential rainfall of a kind we weren't used to. That combination proved to be a fatal blow.
Tak to prostě byla smrtící rána pro ten objekt.
The city has previously said it plans to restore the artworks around Barrandov Bridge following the completion of the bridge's reconstruction. Friday's collapse of one of these artworks has now made that task considerably more urgent. Karo says he hopes that even the destroyed sculpture will return to its original location, since it is culturally significant, particularly for younger generations.
Já jsem to dobře pochopil, tak oni mají zaměřenou tu plastiku.
As I understand it, the Prague City Gallery had already scanned and measured the sculpture, so it should be possible to create a very accurate copy. I would say an almost exact replica, even preserving the imprint of the wooden boards used when the concrete was cast. I would be very happy to see it return because it resonates strongly with younger people and with subcultures such as skateboarders, rap artists and the graffiti community.
Rapový nebo graffiti subkultury, tak to velmi rezonuje. No.
Daniela Lazarová reporting. Half tram, half train. Engineers in the village of Dětenice in the Jičín region are testing a vehicle that could make regional rail transport more efficient. Powered by onboard batteries, the prototype could begin carrying passengers within 2 years if everything goes according to plan. Romana Grajcarová has the story.
The villages of Dětenice and Líbaň, northeast of Prague, are just 4 kilometers apart. The regional train covers the distance in around 5 minutes. But at the beginning of June, passengers waiting at Líbaň station witnessed an unusual sight. A blue tram rolled into the station from Dětenice on railway tracks. The vehicle has been named Lenka, an acronym for the Czech phrase meaning Light Electric Rechargeable Rail Vehicle by AŽD. It originally served as a tram in Brno, featuring 8 axles and 5 doors on each side. But as Antonín Diviš, Deputy Director for Research and Development at AŽD company, explains, the vehicle underwent extensive modifications to operate both as a tram and as a train.
Liší se dvojkolími, který umožňují provoz po železniční infrastruktuře, samozřejmě je tam...
The main difference lies in the wheel sets, which allow it to run on a railway infrastructure. Naturally, we've also added a range of safety technologies required for railway operation. but the primary modification is the battery pack. We've replaced the roof-mounted power supply with a battery system that powers the vehicle independently.
Thanks to this solution, the train-tram should eventually be able to travel both through city centers and along regional railway lines. So far, the vehicle has only been tested on a dedicated test track. AŽD company plans to apply for approval to carry passengers once the trails are complete. That is also the hope of the company's CEO Zdeněk Hrdlička.
Já bych samozřejmě byl hrozně rád, kdyby příští sezonu turistickou už tady mohla jezdit.
Of course, I'd be delighted if the train-tram could already be carrying passengers during next year's tourist season, but that depends on the results of the testing. So far, we know it performs well over railway switches and that the infrastructure works as expected.
Ovlivňuje dobře přejezdy, že ta infrastruktura funguje.
Compared with conventional regional trains, operating the train-tram is expected to be significantly cheaper. For passengers, the concept could also bring greater convenience in the future.
Pro cestující to může do budoucna a není to třeba úplně dlouhá budoucnost.
Passengers could travel all the way into the city center without changing trains. The vehicle would simply switch to urban operating mode and move directly from the railway network onto city tram tracks.
Kolej zapne si prostě podmínky pro jízdu ve městě.
However, current Czech legislation does not yet allow train trams to operate. The Ministry of Transport considered introducing the necessary legal changes back in 2012, but ultimately abandoned the plan. According to ministry spokesperson František Jemelka, any legislative amendment will depend on whether there is sufficient demand for this type of transport.
We have commissioned a study to determine under what conditions light rail vehicles can operate on the Czech railway network. We do intend to amend the legislation if the study confirms that such vehicles would be practical in the Czech Republic.
On a single charge, the train-tram should be able to travel around 80 kilometers and reach a maximum speed of 60 kilometers per hour. AŽD has invested approximately 12 million Czech crowns in purchasing, refurbishing and equipping the prototype. The company estimates that the vehicle could begin carrying passengers within 2 years. Before that can happen, engineers must complete a series of tests required by the Czech Railway Authority to verify the modified vehicle's performance on railway infrastructure. The testing program must conclude by the end of 2027, after which AŽD plans to apply for permission to operate the train-tram in regular passenger service.
Thank you, Romana Grajcerová, for that story. A reminder that you're listening to Czechia in 30 minutes, a half hour of news, current affairs, and interesting stories brought to you by Radio Prague International. Before we move on to our feature story, we have something special for our listeners.
This is Radio Prague, Czechoslovakia.
On the occasion of our 90th anniversary, Radio Prague International has decided to celebrate this milestone with you. Our voice has been broadcast to the world for 9 decades. Now it is time for your voice to be heard on our program. Tell us your story. Why do you listen to Radio Prague International? Since when have you known Radio Prague International, and what does Radio Prague International mean to you today? And last but not least, choose one story from our archive and tell us why it resonated with you. And how to participate? You can either send us an email at english@radio.cz with a recording answering the questions above, send us your phone number so we can call you and record your answers, or send us your answers in written form and we will read them for you. Your responses can be anonymous, or they can include your name if you wish. In any case, they will become a central part of our special broadcast culminating in August, the month when Radio Prague International was established in 1936. For 90 years, our station has been broadcasting stories of people, places and events that we believe would be valuable to you. Now, in these uncertain times, more than ever, it is your story that would be of value to us. Share it with us, share it with the world. The floor is yours.
In an exclusive interview for Czech radio recorded at the Colors of Ostrava festival, President Petr Pavel warned against war fatigue over Ukraine and called for more political dialogue. He spoke about social media, culture, and the importance of constitutional principles. Vít Pohanka summarizes the hour-long talk.
Přichází pan Petr Pavel.
After being greeted with a long applause, Petr Pavel said festivals such as Colors of Ostrava, the Karlovy Vary International Film Festival, and Slovakia's Pohoda offer something increasingly rare, an opportunity for people with very different political views to spend time together.
To umožňuje lidem rozdílných názorů, rozdílných preferencí.
They allow people with different opinions to come together in one place and enjoy something together. Especially today, in a partially divided society, I think that is extraordinarily important. So according to President Pavel, culture has a unique ability to communicate not only facts but also emotions, helping people understand experiences that cannot be conveyed through political arguments alone.
Nedávno jsem měl možnost navštívit koncert Iron Maiden a přestože se tam určitě sešlo.
Asked whether there was a particular song capable of uniting political opponents, the president instead recalled attending an Iron Maiden heavy metal rock band concert.
Na tu, řekněme, hodinku a 3/4 všichni si užívali tu jednu muziku.
For an hour and 3/4, everyone was simply enjoying the same music. It brought people together, at least for a while. That's exactly why it's good to go to events like these and leave our political preferences outside. The interview soon turned from music to one of the most contentious political disputes of recent months.
Jste byl v Ankaře?
Jo, Ankaru, ano. A tam to nebylo moc o kultuře.
Myslím si, že
President Pavel's participation in the NATO summit in Ankara. The disagreement over who should lead the Czech delegation largely overshadowed the summit itself in domestic political debate. Petr Pavel expressed regret that constitutional arguments had eclipsed what he considers much more important questions concerning European security. While describing the dispute as a matter of constitutional principle rather than personal rivalry, President Petr Pavel insisted that he could not simply accept pressure to stay away.
Já jsem to vnímal tak, že nemohu counout tomu tlaku, který tady byl.
I couldn't give in to the pressure that was there and that Andrej Babiš expressed in the words, "Don't go to Ankara and there will be peace." There wouldn't have been peace anyway, because once such a process begins, it tends to continue. The president then argued that the issue was not merely about one summit, but about preserving the constitutional balance between the country's institutions. According to him, governments cannot gradually redefine presidential powers without agreement, warning that recent proposals to limit the president's role in appointing ambassadors show why he considered the dispute significant. At the same time, Pavel lamented that the public discussion focused almost entirely on domestic political conflict rather than on the conclusions of the NATO meeting itself.
Jaký závěr summitu si já, co by průměrný občan Česka
Asked what ordinary Czechs should take away from the summit, President Pavel offered what he described as both good and bad news. The positive message, he said, is that NATO remains a credible alliance despite public disagreements and criticism from figures such as Donald Trump.
Na to i přes všechny zdánlivé rozmíšky a kritiku.
NATO is still the united organization that guarantees collective defense for all its members. I say that with full responsibility and I am very glad that it remains so.
Jsme jedna z mála zemí a opravdu se to dá počítat na jedné ruce, kde...
However, Petr Pavel at the same time warned that Czechia risks falling behind many of its allies when it comes to defense spending. He noted that a number of countries with smaller economies are contributing proportionally more to collective defense than Czechia.
Stále se tváříme, jako by zodpovědní měli být ti ostatní.
If we continue saying that we simply cannot afford it, while countries with fewer resources are doing more, other allies will inevitably begin to see us as irresponsible and unwilling to share the burden.
Ono těch iniciativ je víc. My jsme se teď bavili právě o té jedné, která vznikla nedávno v Paříži.
The president also expressed support for new European initiatives to strengthen air and missile defense, saying that closer cooperation with Ukraine benefits both sides. Ukraine's battlefield experience, President Pavel argued, is something European countries cannot obtain in peacetime, while European industrial capacity can help Ukraine defend itself more effectively.
Na jedné straně evropské země získávají zkušenosti, které si Ukrajinci mnohdy...
It is not only the right thing to do from the perspective of our values, it is also a very pragmatic approach when we consider both Ukraine's needs and our own.
I naše vlastní.
Although many Europeans are becoming tired of hearing about the war, President Pavel cautioned against allowing war fatigue to turn into indifference. He acknowledged that people naturally try to distance themselves psychologically from prolonged crises.
Je to taková sebeobrana našeho vědomí proti tomu, co...
It is a form of self-protection, the president said. But he then stressed that the conflict continues to shape Europe's security, regardless of whether people consciously think about it.
Takže je důležité žít dál, protože život jde dál nejenom u nás.
Let's enjoy life, that is completely natural. But once we return to our everyday lives, let's remain in solidarity with those who cannot enjoy the luxury of safety and peace.
No, určitě by nebylo dobře, abychom si tady vytvářeli atmosféru strachu, na které se budeme bát.
The president at the same time rejected alarmism, arguing that while wars have always been part of human history, fear should not become paralyzing. Instead, he said, democracies should invest in deterrence, strong alliances and preparedness in order to prevent future conflicts. Peace, he added, doesn't exist simply because we wish for it. It exists because we are willing to protect it.
A budeme proto dělat všechno, co bude potřeba.
Much of the second half of the interview focused on President Pavel's increasingly strained relationship with Prime Minister Andrej Babiš from the ANO party. He rejected suggestions that both sides were equally responsible for the stalemate, saying he had repeatedly proposed meetings and compromises that received either negative responses or none at all, and argued that regular communication between the country's two highest constitutional offices is essential because they share responsibility in areas such as foreign policy and national security.
Já jsem vždycky zdůrazňoval to, že můžeme mít rozdílné názory.
We can have different opinions, but that doesn't mean we should see a different opinion as an act of hostility. President Pavel also rejected claims from government supporters that he has become the leader of the opposition.
To označení lídr opozice je velice pohodlná a život.
Calling the label politically convenient, Petr Pavel argued that a directly elected president represents voters across the political spectrum rather than any single party. The president then warned that prolonged institutional conflict ultimately hurts citizens rather than politicians.
Když strávíme většinu času a energie tím, že budeme...
If we spend our time competing over who is more right, everyone loses, President Pavel said. Towards the end of the discussion, President Pavel returned to a theme that had run through the interview from the beginning, the importance of dialogue.
Sociální sítě mají bohužel moc otrávit atmosféru ve společnosti.
He warned that social media increasingly encourage people to retreat into ideological bubbles where opposing arguments are treated as personal attacks rather than opportunities for discussion. Instead of trying to silence opponents, President Pavel said societies should encourage respectful debate. Reflecting on meetings with young politicians from across the political spectrum, Petr Pavel said he remains optimistic that a different political culture is possible.
Mně to tak přijde, že ti mladí politici, když jsou mezi sebou,
They are capable of listening to one another before they become trapped in the confrontational habits of everyday politics, he observed. Whether discussing music festivals, NATO strategy or constitutional disputes, President Pavel repeatedly returned to one central message. Democracy depends not only on institutions, but on the willingness of people with different views to keep talking to one another.
That story from Vít Pohanka brings us to the end of today's half-hour broadcast. For more, you'll find us at www.radio.cz. You can also follow Radio Prague on Instagram, Facebook, and X. This is Anna-Marie Regner saying thank you for listening and goodbye.